All right, we are live. All right. So, welcome everybody. Good morning. How are we doing this early morning?
Good morning.
Good morning. Morning. So, welcome everybody and people who are attending. I know that people will be joining up with every virtual event. They joined a little late, but so I want to welcome everybody to the roadmap to the beloved community, a discussion on cultural hub development. My name is Marlon Solomon. I'm the founder of Afro American Academy. I'm a Boston based nonprofit organization that our mission is to build cultural bridges in the African diaspora through education, technology, and travel. This event is part of the Fierce Urgency of Now City Awake Festival 2023, and that's put on by the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. I'm really excited today. We have great panelists and our moderator. But before I get to that, I wanted to quickly use this time to kind of set the tone on what we've been doing here at the Afro American Academy, Afro American Culture Initiative, and we welcome everybody on the broadcast. So, this event we're bringing people together to discuss how we are experiencing and defining culture in the city of Boston. Our discussion centers around cultural hub development, and like cultural hubs is like like Chinatown or like Little Italy. These communities bring people into their community um, to get whatever artifacts that they're looking at. So cultural artifacts are like usually anything that's passed on from one generation to the next, and they come into these communities and they buy goods and services based on most of that ideology. So like Chinatown is really just based on food, and people come into that community and they to develop food. Hold on, let me just all right. Um, so they do that, and they based on food, and when they do the food, you go in. There's buildings. These buildings require services like their kitchens, that is gas, electricity, things, and that's how the just from food an ecosystem of culture is developed. So we're thinking about like how does this work in Hyde Park? We've been working with the community input board. Well, I'm also a member of the community input board, and we are looking to work with Hyde Parkers and see how can we get people to come into our community and patronize our businesses. But usually they're coming to like have fun, like and we want to like grow that cultural hub so that people will know exactly what Hyde Park is meant for, right? So we have three exciting panelists. So let me get to them first. But before I get to them, let me introduce our moderator for today, which Brianna Miller, the Chief of Community Engagement for the City of Boston. She's a Dorchester native and a daughter of a Haitian immigrant. Chief Miller brings years of local government experience to the Community Engagement Cabinet to eliminate silos between Boston residents and City Hall. Chief Miller oversees various community engagement departments at the City Hall, um, which include 311, ONS, Office of Civic Engagement, Spark Boston, and more. Chief Miller Chief Miller's direction of the Community Engagement Cabinet began at January of 2022, but her passion for community is longstanding. After first joining the City Council President's Office under Mayor Wu in 2016 as a communications intern, she returned in 2018 as an administrative director and later as civic engagement director. Ms. Miller has represented Mayor Wu's council office on the board of ABCD and previously served on ABCD's Neighborhood Programs Planning and Evaluation Committee. She's a graduate of Quinnipiac University with a bachelor's in political science and a master's degree in public relations. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you for having me. It's really great to be here in community. Really appreciate the commitment to building a supportive Hyde Park, and look forward to the conversation because we have a lot of exciting panelists today. Um, so Thank you for the introductions, but I'm gonna head right into making sure that you guys all know that who is here speaking today. So first, we have our dear beloved counselor, Boston City Councilor at Large, Julie Mejia. Councilor Mejia is currently the chair of the Committee of Education, the chair of the Committee of Government Accountability, Transparency, and Accessibility, as well as the chair committee on Labor, Workforce, and Economic Development. Um, Born in the Dominican Republic, City Councilor at Large Julia Mejia arrived in the neighborhood of Dorchester when she was 5 years old. Raised by a single mother who was undocumented for most of her childhood, she was forced at an early age to speak up on behalf of her mother and others who felt ignored by the very institutions that were there to serve them. Driven by a lifelong pursuit of justice and equity, Councilor Mejia has created countless opportunities for others to step into their power and advocate for positive change as a community organizer. Following the historic 2019 election and historic 2 month recount, Julia won her seat by a single vote and is now the first Afro-Latina to sit on the Boston City Council. Good morning, Councilor Mejia.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy to be here and looking forward to diving into the robust conversation that we're going to have on all things cultural hubs. So thank you for the invitation. Happy to be alongside you all today.
Thank you. Next, we have Tien Simpson, who is the executive director of Hyde Park Main Streets. Promoted to the position of executive director in June 2018. Although it feels like you have been wrapping your arms around the community much longer, Tien Simpson has worked with Hyde Park Main Streets for over a decade as the program coordinator. In her time with the organization, Tien has established a multitude of close relationships with both businesses and residents of the community. TN works with small business owners by promoting technical assistance, marketing, branding, storefront improvements such as new signage. TN is also a avid community volunteer, have supporting the 54th Regiment, Hyde Park Historical Society, Hyde Park Arts Society Association, Hyde Park the Hyde Park Food Pantry, Ethos, Dance Academy, Boston Trinity Academy, and others. Tien is a resident of Hyde Park and has been a resident of Hyde Park since 1997 and lives with her husband and has 2 adult young children. Good morning. I think you might be muted, Tien.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation to be on the panel. This is an important discussion, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we also have an historic first Boston City Council at Large, Ruthie Louisiane. A grounded and thoughtful and inclusive leader, Ruthie is working to build our neighborhoods together where shared prosperity is the foundation of a just and equitable Boston. The daughter of working class immigrants from Haiti, Ruthie was born and raised in Mattapan and Hyde Park. She claims both and attended Boston Public Schools. Her first job at 14 was a walking tour guiding with the youth organization My Town, offering a people-centered history of Boston's neighborhood. Mayor Menino appointed her to a committee to redesign the students' assignment process. As a ward fellow, she also interned for former state representative Marie St. Fleur. Now, as an experienced lawyer, Rusi has practiced before Boston Housing Court, representing families facing eviction and foreclosure, worked to elect progressive prosecutors across the country, and supported voter rights cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. She also served as the senior attorney on Senator Warren's presidential campaign and drafted agreements netting millions of dollars for first-generation homeowners to help close the racial homeownership and wealth gap within Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, or MAHA. As City Council at Large, Ruth C. is fighting for affordable housing and homeownership, support for our immigrant communities, improved funding and teacher diversities at our schools, and using all the tools at the city's disposal to address racial justice and equity. Her tenure is historic. She is the first Haitian American elected to represent Boston citywide. She is a graduate of Boston Public Schools, Columbia University, Harvard Law School, and Harvard Kennedy School of Government. She is trilingual with French and German and is proficient in Spanish. Thank you for joining, Counselor.
Thank you. Happy to be here this morning.
So, and then we also have Marlon, of course, who introduced himself at the beginning. Thank you for your commitment to Hyde Park and Afro-American institution as well. I encourage everyone I encourage Afro-American TV live stream audience to participate in the YouTube comments. We have someone behind the scenes um, filtering the comments and making sure that when we have a Q&A portion, those can be uplifted. I really, really want to make sure I'm thanking Nkiru, who is behind the scenes. We all know what it requires to run things, and having her back there tinkering and making sure everything happens is crucial because it seems seamless. And thank you for your support doing that behind the scenes. And thank you all out there for participating and tuning into this very important conversation. Since it's so important, I want to hop right into the first question to make sure we're addressing what we're here to today, which is how do we build a cultural institution and divine culture throughout the city, but Hyde Park as well. So the first question, how are we experiencing and defining culture and its connection to the city of Boston so we know what we are building? And I'll repeat it one more time, and then we can probably head right over to, I think I introduced Councilor Mejia first, so we can go to Councilor Mejia. How are we experiencing and defining culture and its connection to the city of Boston so we know what we are building?
Great. So I think that's a really important question for us to look at, especially given the climate in the city of Boston and also the national landscape when we're thinking about how we really build together across our differences. And when I think about culture, I just don't think about linguistic experiences or our origin or where we happen to be from. I think about culture in a more holistic manner in which we're also looking at issues of expression of gender identity, sexual orientation, our the foods that we eat, the languages that we speak. And also when we think about culture and when we're thinking about being inclusive, we also have to look at the culture of issues around class, right? There's a culture even among the people who have access to more privilege. And so I think when we're thinking about creating space and being inclusive, we have to make sure that we're able to look at the entire city as a whole and figuring out how we can embrace and create space for all of us to see ourselves and to be affirmed. And so creating space for culture building requires us to also recognize the number of different types of spaces and places that we're in. But as it relates to Hyde Park in particular, I'm really excited because Marcia, a few years ago, invited me to participate in some of the coalition building opportunities within Hyde Park. And I was so incredibly inspired by the richness of the diversity the Hyde Park has to showcase, whether it be through businesses, the residents that live.
I think we have
There, the number of different folks who are from.
You were slightly
diverse
delayed,
Caribbean.
slightly,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a deficit here with my internet. Not sure if you all can hear me, but I was just uplifting the fact that Hyde Park and my work in the last few years alongside Marcia and other civic association leaders, that Hyde Park is uniquely positioned here in the city of Boston to really define what culture building looks like, whether it be through the richness of the businesses, the diaspora, the Caribbean communities that make up Hyde Park. I think Hyde Park is not only a cultural hub, but it is an amazing blueprint that I think the city of Boston can lean into to develop more cultural hubs across the city of Boston.
Thank you, Counselor, and underscoring the affirmative places that you mentioned and the leaders that are really already on the ground doing the work. I can head over to Deanne if you wanted to answer the question.
Sure. So I've always envisioned Hyde Park as a cultural hub, especially in our square. We've had some very, very unique businesses. We are, I believe, one of the rare neighborhoods that actually has a performing arts in Riverside Theater. We have the Switch Co-op, which is a co-op of various artists coming together to share their artwork and to make it available to the public, where they wouldn't have a chance any other way of showcasing that. We have a very, not too new, but very, very successful paint studio that is bringing people outside of the city of Boston and beyond. She is doing gangbuster at her business. This is Canvas Studio. And to the point where even the city of Boston have asked her to maybe open up a second location down at the seaport. So that's wonderful to be able to, open up a business in Hyde Park and thrive. And Hyde Park Main Street, that's our goal, is to make it a place where various business owners can come, get involved in the community and be successful. And I think, those are just some of the business I wanted to highlight to let people realize that, wow, there are things happening in Hyde Park and it's a destination place. Thank you.
Definitely, for sure. And thank you for all your work you have done to make sure it's a destination neighborhood. Councilor Lujan.
Good morning. Thank you, Chief Malloy, and thank you to my fellow panelists. Thank you, Marlon and Afro-American Academy, for having me. I really love this question about culture. As an at-large city councilor, I go from neighborhood to neighborhood and see what are our strengths, what are the weaknesses in terms of really bringing out Boston culture. And I'll just say this, whenever anyone is trying to define Boston culture, there shouldn't be a singular way of defining it, because we are such a diverse city, a city where the majority of people in the city are people of color. And so when we're talking about Boston culture, when folks are limiting that to Boston sports or just the Museum of Fine Arts, it's very limiting, and it's also discriminatory. It's ignoring our rich communities, our rich immigrant communities, our rich Black communities. And so when we're thinking about Boston culture, it has to be large enough and elastic enough to cover everybody and to allow everyone some space. And so I'm excited that we can go from neighborhood, from Alton, Brighton, they have their own culture. And in Hyde Park, what we're building, as Brianna said, I do claim both Mattapan and Hyde Park. I live right on the line. Hyde Park is just such a great neighborhood with so much beautiful leadership. I look at the Day of Fun that happened last weekend, and everyone that came together to just, the Switch Co-op, like Tan was talking about, was present. Brandon over at the Intriguing Hair was present. Vicky Gall and the Hyde Park Historical Society. There's so much richness and diversity to who we are as Hyde Park, and creating and allowing space to celebrate each other is really important. I think when I think about like a cultural hub, Tan was also mentioning, we had my sister's birthday party last weekend at that Canvas studio, at Canvas Studio. And I'm thinking about how Hyde Park right now is becoming and is really a destination neighborhood where you can go, and you can go for art, you can go for a show at the Riverside Theater, you can go for dinner at Antonio's Baccari or Park 54 or Rincon. There are all these options. And I think that's what we want to see in all of our neighborhoods. How are we creating space, and how are we doing work, for example, with the Preservation Committee, to make sure that we are retaining the rich history of the 54th Regiment and all that Hyde Park has to offer, and how do we honor all of that and make space really for everyone. And I think Hyde Park can really, and is really, being a model in what that should and does look like. And of course, rich Haitian community, which is important to Hyde Park. So I just want to mention and uplift that as well.
Can't forget that. And definitely giving the neighborhood options. So we build those affirmative spaces that Councilor Mejia was talking about as well. I'm good to the second question. I'm going to kick it over to Marlon so he can kick it off. What is the role and challenges of the community in developing a shared culture? when we're building cultural spaces. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh no, not me.
Yeah.
You can hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, great.
You're good now.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. I want to say thank you to everybody for joining the panel and helping, carry this discussion further. When I see the roles and challenges, I think, well, I always talk like an engineer. So I'm thinking, okay, how do we get people into our community so they can spend money so that the community will grow? And I think one of the major challenges is being known, kind of like theme, like, when you go to the North End, you know what you're expecting. If you go to, like it's like Counselor said, Alston, Brighton, you know that there's like a huge, like band culture there, and then you can go to Chinatown and on and on. And each community has its own, specific, characteristics and what the people there are doing. We have performing arts, we have the Neponset River, it goes on and on. I think one of the major challenges is to try and see how best we can like frame it and theme it and market it as such that so that it isn't like, oh, there's an event going on in Hyde Park, but instead that Hyde Park is actually the event. A lot of us, when we go to Chinatown, we're not going to Chinatown like necessarily specifically. Of course, sometimes we do, but for anything in particular, you go and enjoy the culture. Hey, I go to this restaurant, I hang out here, I do that. I do that with my youth groups. We just go and hang out, and then we get into whatever we get into when we get there. That's the kind of thing we want people to know. Okay, Hyde Park, you can get this. You can get, like the art canvas studio. I love canvas studio. You can go get acupuncture across the street. There's so many other things, but it needs to kind of. I think one of the major challenges, how do we present that? In regards to shared culture, I think that we have to just learn about ourselves. I think this is an opportunity. Where we have to get some education out there where people can learn more about each other's cultures and have so that because we don't want it to be one kind of culture over another. We want everybody to feel like welcome in this space, physical space that celebrates who they are. And when you have that, people will come together. And I know Hyde Park is well on the way of making that a reality. So I'm very excited about, getting this conversation forward.
Thank you for sharing that. We definitely have all the components here in Hyde Park. It's just building that connectivity. To Counselor Mejia, can you talk about some of the roles and challenges with building and developing like a cultural space that we see in the city of Boston?
Yeah. And Chief Malor, the next question, I'm not going to go first, okay? I'll do the first two, but that's it, okay? I want to share the love here. I can only speak for myself, right? Having grown up here in the city of Boston at the height of a very racial tension. I think that for me, the work that I've been doing here in the city of Boston has always been rooted with really trying to have and create space for people to have difficult conversations. And I think that oftentimes one of the biggest barriers is that sometimes people would rather not talk about or lean into that discomfort, right? And so one of the things that I've been doing as an at-large city councilor is really finding spaces and places where people don't feel seen or heard or affirmed, and really trying to build across our differences. There is an initiative that our office is working on with the hope and aspiration of really bringing people together so that we can meet ourselves halfway, despite our, cultural differences. Okay, Toby, regardless of our, ay, Dios mío, Toby, no. Hi. So despite all of the tension that exists, is really creating space for people to have heartfelt conversations, because when it comes to culture and racial healing, it really is going to require us to be a little bit more vulnerable, to, at least for me, putting ourselves in spaces and places that we normally don't operate in, so that we can model what it looks like to sit in discomfort. And I think that in my 3.5 years working on the city council, I came into the space fighting hard for people who have been traditionally unseen and unheard. And what I have learned in the 3.5 years in that fight is that oftentimes we get lost in the fight, that we don't see who and how we can do more bridge building, if you will, right? And I have an award-winning personality, y'all, and I have yet to show you that part of me. But realistically, you know, I'm really managing my expectations. But I walked into City Hall unapologetic about who I was here to fight for, which is Black and brown people. And what I have learned in that fight is that we have to find a balance, especially here in the city of Boston, where we're able to bring two very opposing views together to have heart led conversations that are going to be uncomfortable. But the only way we're going to move the city forward if we're willing to do that hard work. And I think as a leader who represents the entire city of Boston and that sits, and I don't code switch, so I'm not that savvy yet being in all these spaces, but I know that for me, I have a responsibility to show up as I am, even in spaces that do not embrace me, and bring people in without creating more divisiveness, which is what I have seen has happened over the last, well, at least a short period of time that I've been in the council. I have seen the city and the ebbs and flows of politics really play out. And we have an opportunity to reset and revision and push people in ways that they have yet to be pushed, so that we can really restore and do a lot of restorative justice. I think that culture building and affirming people requires us to do restorative justice. And that's why I'm so incredibly grateful to Carolyn Crockett and Lou Finfer and the whole coalition that's now working on the busing, doing that whole year anniversary, which is coming up soon, so that we can start really building spaces and places for people of diverse experiences to come together and heal from that trauma. Because unless you lived it, you know, you're not really going to understand the deep impacts that busing has played on all of us. And I think that that is a good place for us to start as we're building culture. And I think it's important for us to have those difficult discussions, and I'm here for that work.
No, thank you, Counselor. As you were speaking, it made me think, my mother would always say, change happens at the intersection of challenge and confrontation. And we are aware of the challenges, but it takes very brave leaders like the people on this call to confront them. Because, you know, we have a lot of conflict avoidant, but if we don't confront the conflicts or confront the challenges we see, change will not happen. So thank you for your leadership. To Councillor Louisiane, the same question, but also what is the role of and the challenges of community as we're building culture? But how do we sustain culture? Like building off that question, how do we make it stay?
Thank you, Chief. I'll start by saying, like, one of the biggest challenges to space is actually for our people, for people who have been historically excluded and marginalized, is capital, is money and access, right? Like, in order for you to have, we look at these big institutions like the MFA or the ICA, and you go in and you see their donor walls. You see the people who are investing and giving money. And that's because people, you know, have believed in them or believe in the value of museums, but there's also inherently embedded in that privilege. And so for people to know, like, they don't know where to start oftentimes, so they don't have the capital or know, like, I just got a text yesterday from a cousin who wants to start a youth program and doesn't know where to start to get grants. So oftentimes there's information asymmetry, like our communities and people, they have the ideas, but they don't have the resources and the connections and the community to really be able to effectuate that idea. And so that's the role of me as a city councilor at large, which is why, you know, think about like it being historic that I'm the first Haitian American on the Boston City Council. But why that matters is that it really opens up a door of access to a community that hasn't had it before. And we think about our positions in government, that's what we should be doing. How are we standing in the gap to let people know that like there are these grants that you can get from the from arts and culture. There is the Mass Council of Culture that can help you when we're thinking about our like Little Saigon in Dorchester that was designated Little Saigon by the work of community leaders and activists. Do we think about what that would look like for other neighborhoods that have thriving populations? So I think that that's an important part of it. And like, how do we as people in government uplift and make sure that we are moving resources and money around for that purpose, to really retain and build culture in places and spaces that have traditionally ignored or excluded people. I think that's important. And also, you know, there's this whole model, right? We all look at MLK and he's like, you know, very important figure in the civil rights movement. But I think a challenge sometimes to efforts, community efforts, is dependency on one leader or dependency on just a few leaders, right? Leaders and movements are not about and cannot be about one person, right? It is never about Route C. It is never about anybody. It is about us as a collective. And for us to be able to do that, you really have to make sure that you are making room and space for all voices. So yes, MLK, but also Byron Rusting, and also Ella Baker, and all of these people without whom MLK's story isn't possible. And so that it's really important for us to not to reduce any movement or any attempt in one community to one person, because it's about multiple people building off of the legacies and the efforts of people before. And that's why it's incredibly important for leaders to get buy-in from communities, so that we can these movements can become leaderless and can really be about the community and not about one person. It's something that I see sometimes as an at-large city councilor. Some neighborhoods and some community groups do it better than others, but it really and it also solves a problem that we often see, is that movements and efforts aren't intergenerational. I'm going to repeat the Hyde Park Day of Fun, and why that was so beautiful is because it was so diverse and it was intergenerational. You had like, you know, old grandmothers in the watching a basketball game in a really hot room, but it was like that love and support was so full on display. And so I think our efforts when we're talking about culture is, how do you make them intergenerational, and how do people like me who occupy spaces in government uplift that work and find and help be the connective tissue to resources and money and financing.
No, thank you for sharing that. That's how we sustain movements, making sure that we're passing down information, knowledge, and that's what cultural spaces are all about, making sure that we're sharing our history, and so ensuring that hopefully it does not repeat itself. So information is key. Tien, do you have any adds to, you know, what are the challenges when we are creating cultural spaces, and how do we sustain them?
Sure. And of course, I'll talk from the point of, you know, being a Main Street director. Our businesses, sometimes they do struggle in terms of, or at least it's challenging for us when we're having events in the community and we want more business to participate, because we want them to showcase what they have to offer. But, you know, being a small business owner, it's hard. You might not have the manpower, you might not have the resources to participate in events. You know, if we are closing down the street and we're having a fair and we want them to have be able to serve food, that might not be. It sounds easy, but it's not for small business owners. So to be able to offer a space, like you say, to have them participate in events in the community is important. And I try my very best to find out what is happening with the businesses. If they are showcasing, for example, Las Delicias is beginning to have more live entertainment. So I always want to share that with the community. Park 54 is always out there having entertainment all the time. So I think everybody knows Park 54, but there are new businesses that are coming into the entertainment of, you know, showcasing their culture. And so that is my focus, is to help them get the word out and highlight what they have to offer to the community.
Thank you. Marlon, can you talk about sustainability of cultural spaces, and how do we kind of keep them around? Oh, I think you're muted again. There you go.
Hello, there you go. All right. And one of the things that I think that I'm facing is kind of like letting people see how much the land and how the city is designed goes into creating a culture. So most of the kids in Boston, 0 to 17, live in the Blue Hill Avenue part of town. That also is the part that does not have a T, so a T line through it. While yes, it has the free 28. I'm not saying that, but it is historically Jewish. So that's why it never did. And then since then, it has not got one because of that. Well, not to because of that, but just generally that's the history of the area. So knowing the history of the area, how the infrastructure and how things are designed to, the city was designed during segregation. And as it was designed during that time, it is designed to keep certain communities farther away from others. Even it's been actually regressed. So there were like lines that went around down train lines, trolleys that went from Rosendale down Cummings all the way to Manhattan. Now to go there by the T, you've got to go all the way into Boston, get a transfer, to another line and come back in just to go from Hyde Park to, maybe Heat Street, right? So these is how the infrastructure plays a role in, and how do we educate people on, because if we're not dealing with that, then we're kind of like, not necessarily, we're dealing with some of the things that are happening within the infrastructure. So I think that's one of the major things is understanding how the, how communities are designed and developed and the transportation and the access, and how while they're, I think I've done a study, I think it's about 40% of all the T stops are in Brookline. They got 3 lines, then the green line actually, and the latest new T stops are in Somerville and Ball, and going out that way. Meanwhile, the location where the majority, 0 to 17, this is from the BPDA data, this is not my data, that live along Blue Hill Avenue. So these are some of the things that cause, some of the cultural regress. And just to touch on a little bit on what Lou is doing. So Lou did Lou and Ruth Z actually, they came and did a tour for our youth on the Jewish community back in the summer. And that busing issue is because the city was designed around redlining. So it was, so when we think of the METCO program, as much as I support the METCO program, it is literally taking the best and brightest and taking them across the red line, because whether you outlaw the law of segregation, if the design of segregation is still in place, it still exerts the same pressure that it was designed to do. So now these youth are taken out of their communities, and when they're taken out of their communities, like from like a young age, to make up, you can be as young, you're literally getting the best and brightest out there, and that you can run like, okay, how do you get to school? The Google Maps can even give you there's no actual way to get there on the T, and these are the kids that are performing and doing a lot of stuff. I mean, all kids are valuable. I'm just pointing out a particular issue that some youth are experiencing when they're out of these communities. Some of them go hungry at night because they don't want to, they're used to eating Haitian food. And this is a true story. And then they don't have access to the foods that they grew up on. When you're 8, you don't have a big wide palate. You got what your mama cook you. So if you're used to this kind of food, then that's what you get. But when you are the tip of the spear, and this requires you to be the only one of color, or representing a whole community in a space, then while if you're an adult, that's fine. But if you're a minor that doesn't have access to certain, money, things like that, then you cannot really, what you eat is what is there, right? And what, and then how you go home, even if it's only 24 minutes away by car, mom is working, dad is working. You cannot go back and forth to Lincoln Sudbury or Dana Hall or some of the schools on the outskirts that these kids go to. So then they don't see their parents, but like college kids, only do Thanksgiving and things like that, because some of them are boarding situations. So these are some of the pressures. And I think that is one of the major challenges, is to try and see how we can look at and how, things are located, the access to them, things like that, and how that affects how we feel every day, and how we, the kind of foods we eat every day. If you're in a community of color, it's 3 to 4 more times fast food in your environment. These are the things that, and they say, well, you can just go somewhere else. Can you really? Because that costs money to go out of my way to go get the healthy groceries if the grocery store is in, maybe Dedham or whatever, because that's where they're located. So that's the sustainability has to do, I think, with looking at how we are being influenced by our environment, and how do we educate and design to kind of dismantle some of these infrastructural pressures that are existing today.
No, definitely. The common theme I heard was to make sure that we're sustaining our families and neighborhoods. Like we and families look different ways, and it's how do we support them through children's and their education system? Because we know we have brilliant, bright kids in BPS, and making sure that our families feel supported, and how we're like structuring our transportation and structuring housing. I always think about as a young girl going to all the cultural parades and seeing, like in my role now, seeing the attendance of them kind of dwindle. So it's like, how are we making sure that um, families probably, our families are staying in the neighborhood so they can just walk outside their house in JP and go to the Dominican parade, and not being displaced and not being disconnected from their neighborhoods, and how we're building that into BPS, and where our children are, Boys and Girls Club, BCYF centers. How are we building that cultural space just outside of our neighborhoods with really within the family, so wherever they go, they're taking it with them. So that's something that always keeps me up at night, because daughter of a Haitian immigrant, always going to the Haitian parade. Parades are an indicator to me of like where our people are and where we are in celebrations as well. So our next question: what is a cultural hub? It's a long question. So what is a cultural hub? What does a cultural hub do for Boston? And why is it important? I'll break up the question. So what is a cultural hub? What does it do for the what does it do for Boston, and why is it important? And then I will go directly to Tian.
A cultural hub is a space, a location, a neighborhood, a city that is celebrating the people, the history of that neighborhood, or that area. Hyde Park's cultural hub is very diverse. When I first moved to Hyde Park, I wanted to get involved, and I think I was reading the bulletin, and I heard about Hyde Park Main Street, and I figured, how do I get to know my neighborhood? Let me get involved with Hyde Park Main Street. And that was how I became volunteer of the year after a few years, and worked part-time for Hyde Park Main Street. Hyde Park is very unique. We're very connected to each other. You can actually feel like you can walk down the street and say hi to your neighbors, versus possibly another neighborhood where you don't have that connection. We try to share that with everybody. We try to make everybody feel like we try to make everything inclusive if at all possible. And to highlight what we have to offer. So Cultural Hub is representing, the people that live in your community. And we do our best to try to do that in terms of sharing, all the different nationality and diversity that we have in Hyde Park.
Thank you. I'll bump it over to Counselor Louisiane. What is a cultural hub, and why is it important? What does it mean for Boston?
Yeah, so I think cultural hubs, both if we're talking about a physical space and just generally, I think like cultural hubs are places where people can go and experience what the city is, like a little bit of the flavor of the city, whether that be martial arts. Honestly, I think about like the things that we have in Hyde Park. We have like a martial arts studio, we have dance studio, we have Riverside Theater, we have the art studio. They're like so much. And so I think a cultural hub, like having a singular physical space where people can rent it out, or it doesn't belong to anyone but to community. I think it is important. And I think when we're talking about even about tourism, I think the way that Marlon talked about how do we have Hyde Park, there are neighborhoods like the North End is like a destination neighborhood, or Chinatown is a destination neighborhood. Maybe because of like Hyde Park's geography, like where we are, maybe it's not a destination neighborhood like for tourism. Not saying that we can't get there, because we can, but how do we even think about like Hyde Park being a tourism destination for people from other neighborhoods, right? Like, oh, I want to spend the night out in Hyde Park, because there is all of this culture, because it is seen as a cultural hub. And one thing that I did want to underline is that the creation of cultural hubs, and it's very intentional. When Tian was talking about Hyde Park being a neighborhood where people know each other or people smile and say hi, I don't think Hyde Park has always been that way. If we're being real, right? We're talking about a neighborhood that was previously farmland, that was previously not part of the city of Boston, that was previously hostile towards immigrants, towards the Haitian community coming in, and has now flourished into being a place where, even hearing Tien say, everyone knows Park 54, and Park 54 has only been around for a little over a year. So these cultural hubs and these spaces that we're creating are really intentional, and we have to be intentional about them, right? You don't just start saying hi to people. It's not, it's because people know that Hyde Park is this place where people are committed to being a welcoming and inclusive place. And so I think about what Boston can become. I don't know if we're fully there as being seen as a place that is a cultural hub for Black and brown folks. Even when you're talking to people and they're like, "Where are the Black people in Boston?" I'm like, what are you talking about? We are a majority people of color city. But to Marlon's point, we look at patterns of segregation. We look at patterns of redlining and block busting. The way that Boston's culture appears if you drop someone downtown, or if you drop someone in Quincy Market, you're not going to get the full flavor, right? Is that Boston's cultural hub? I would argue that it's not, that our cultural hubs are in our neighborhoods. I mean, it's a work of everyone, people on this call, people, residents, and community, to really draw that out.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Mejia, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I think having most people that grow up in Boston usually just stay in Boston. We have this syndrome that we don't leave our neighborhoods. Okay, y'all, I just want you all to know. And then we have this identity situation where we have a hard time embracing people who are not from Boston. So when we're thinking about creating cultural hubs, we have to really reconcile with the fact that we have an adverse reaction to what we consider outsiders, right? That's truth. And when we haven't left our neighborhoods, we don't know what life is like outside of our immediate neighborhoods. And I think that those two things are recipes oftentimes for lack of being able to build culture. And so I, having moved to New York, I worked at MTV for 10 years, and I had the opportunity to leave Boston and travel the country. And I didn't realize that Boston had an accent, or that Boston was considered racist. And so when people would make jokes about where I came from, that how segregated Boston really was. And it took me having to leave my hometown to realize how much work we need to do in my hometown, right? And so when I think about Hyde Park, and I think about the diaspora, and I think about the richness of diversity that exists in Hyde Park, I think, and going back to what I said in the beginning, is that Hyde Park is incredibly well suited to be a model neighborhood around what rich diversity and racial healing looks like, because I have been a part of Hyde Park's efforts for the last 2.5 years, and I have seen people from all walks of life and experiences participating in cultural activities, whether it be virtually or in person. I don't see that in a lot of different neighborhoods, to be honest with you. And I think Hyde Park, in terms of creating a hub of sorts, whether it is a physical space or movement, I don't know. I think that Hyde Park is a leader in convening that type of environment. And I think that what I find to be the most exciting for me is when I think about the richness of not just our racial differences, but also our social economic differences. I think Hyde Park is also well positioned to have those really difficult conversations around class and privilege. And I think that that's also another area of being able to build a cultural hub. And I think lastly, that I'd just like to add to this conversation is that I think about the city of Boston, and I think about, Brianna, you said something that really resonated with me around our schools. We as parents, we fight hard for our schools, and then we can't afford to live in the neighborhoods that we have fought so hard to help improve. And I think that when we're thinking about culture building, I think building that infrastructure for those conversations to happen in tandem is really important as part of the culture building conversation, because I think that there's a lot of fear for residents who have grown up here or who live here and have invested their time and energy here, that they are afraid that they're going to fix these schools and then they're not going to be able to live here, right? And so I think that I really do appreciate you saying that, because I think that is part of the culture building conversation, and I'm glad that you uplifted it here as one of the things that we need to keep top of mind.
Definitely. Thank you for that, Counselor. Marlon, do you want to add to that, answer that question?
Yeah, well, briefly, I just say I'm working I'm looking on a metric. It's culturally generated revenue. That revenue is trying to because we need, again, to be talking in. So if how much culturally generated revenue is generated by a location, right? And that I think is extremely important. It's important against fighting gentrification, because one of the aspects that we're dealing with is that these communities are unable to keep up with the rents and things like that, the rising rents in Boston, and a lot of that is because you just need income. So if you don't have this income coming into this community, then you're not getting the tax generation and stuff like that becomes less, and then the schools around it become less. So focusing like I said, I think there's some clear messaging, because I think one of the it's like I mentioned during challenges, there needs to be a little more clear we need to figure out how we can clear message what it is you find in Hyde Park, so that when people it's kind of like marketing 101. You have to know differentiate your what you get in Hyde Park and let people know. So when they hear Hyde Park, it's synonymous with just if I said jerk chicken, I don't even have to say anything more. What culture that comes from. So there's this kind of clear messaging, and then that hopefully would bring in people and then increase the culturally generated revenue. So I think that is that's pretty much the main thing I feel that in cultural hub development, how how successful we're being. So I think that's where I land on that one.
No, thank you for that answer. I know that I'm not a panelist, but I'm going to answer the question. I did really always view cultural hubs as our educational institutions. So I think schools is where you learn. Schools are where you have your first of many. And when we think about our school buildings, I often think, are we creating not just a space for learning, but a space for learning academically in a book, but learning each other. And it is, and I always view it as the great equalizer. You are in school with people that have that are different from you, but also similar to you. So how do we make sure our schools are building that extra connective tissue with our young people who are now and our future? And that also builds a sustainability when we're talking about really cultural district or cultural institution. So I've always viewed our education, pipelines and ecosystems as an opportunity to, stabilize and build culture within Boston. So that's my little 2 cents. We have one more question, and then we're going to head to Q&A, Q&A from the audience. So this is regarding specifically the Community Impact Board. So what are, like, we would do ourselves a disservice without having this conversation without talking about next steps. So what are the next steps for the Community Impact Board and like building a cultural hub in Hyde Park? Like, what do you think the next steps are for maybe our elected leadership or for just a resident, a business owner? What are next steps that we could look forward to? And I will hand it over to Councillor Louisiane.
Thank you, Chief Malor. So I think it's great to always do the envisioning and think about what the next steps are. So I'll talk about something really exciting that happened when we're talking about artist space. A lot of artists are being pushed out of our neighborhood because they can't afford to afford the space, right? Boston is the second most expensive city to rent, and you feel that whether you're a resident, you feel that commercially. But the city of Boston has recently made efforts to support artists and support art space recently. Artists in Alston Brighton were being pushed out of a building, and the city of Boston, led by Chief Cara Elliott Ortega, made a landmark deal that provided the artists with physical space in Dorchester. And so the city has assets, the city has resources. And then I am always somebody that thinks about, like, okay, how do we this was a problem, how do we solve it? How do we get people around the table to solve the problem? Take out the politics, take out all the stuff. We want a culture center, we want a hub. What does that look like? Who are the resources? Who are the big philanthropists? Do we involve the Boston Foundation? Do we involve the Barr Foundation? We have the city, we have the Mass Cultural Center to come together and think about how can we create this physical space? Where's the money that's on the table? What is our goal? What is the vision? What is the business plan for this cultural center? And it doesn't have to be the most formal document, but there's enough leadership, there's enough energy. Brianna, you're talking about these, how schools and education is part of our cultural scene. How do we tap into the talent that we have here to help with those business plans and business models? I was just doing it with the Haitian community, right? We've had this dream and this vision that has finally come to fruition, because we were able to bring older generation with the newer generation to really execute on an idea. And it happened because we got around a table and really were like, okay, how do we put our heads down and execute and make this work? And so I think that's what the next step is. How do you bring people around the table who are bought in enough to, like, not just be a show horse, right? To be a workhorse to get something done. And then how do we plan and build? It's not impossible. It's definitely a solvable goal. And I think there'd be a lot of energy. I think about the Celebrate Hyde Park party that we had early in the summer and how beautiful that was. There is energy here in Hyde Park, and there's money here for us to realize that vision. So I think that's the next step for the Community Input Board. Like, what is the room and the table of stakeholders? How are we making sure that we are including a diverse group of people at that table, people whom English is their first language, not their first language, homeowners, renters, everyone who has a cultural vision for Hyde Park. How do we bring them to the table? And people who don't even, like, there's also something, and this is where I'll end. There are people who have ideas and who have desires for Hyde Park who aren't even able to articulate that as a cultural vision for the neighborhood. And there's important work that we have to do there to, like, help folks, right? That's why we stand in the gap, to help folks realize that what you have is a vision for a cultural hub, is a vision that could be a deep contribution. And we got to pull that out to make sure that no one's left behind at these tables.
Thank you, Councillor Louisiane. I'll pass it over to Marlon. Do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, no problem. The Community Input Board, great thing, because I'm on the Community Input Board, and we're looking for people to support and come on board, like Ruzi said, and actually, like, step up to the plate and put put your work where your mouth is. So in the Community Board in May, we had a idea exchange, our second idea exchange, in which we brought the community together to come up with a list of goals that we wanted to achieve for this year and next. And one of those goals, was the Youth Day that we had last year. It's actually way ahead. We have to give kudos to Joe and the rest of the group that worked hard on bringing the Day of Play out. But the cultural group is one of them. We want to take, as far as the cultural group, we want to dig into the assets. What do we have on ground? Taking, like, an audit, right? And maybe what are the things that the whole city is not may need more of, and maybe this is some of the deliberate ways we can now say, okay, well, there's a gap. People maybe want to. I know one that I'd like to see is like live music. I'm in Texas today, and there's, we went out yesterday to, me and group to a place where people my age could listen to live music, and it was like a neighborhood kind of situation. Like that's what they do, not like one a day a week or something. So there was something like that. I know that. So basically taking an audit, looking at what we have, assets, artifacts, group, cultural groups and things, and trying to make that assessment. So we were looking for people from the, to volunteer. And so you can reach out to Community Input Board of Hyde Park. You can reach out to me, Marlon at AfroAmerican.org. And we're trying to get that's one of the major focuses of what we're trying to do. I do research, with Northeastern people know stuff like that. But in doing all that research, we need foots on ground. We need people to join the group. So those are some of the things that are working and are already doing in our community. And if you want to be part of it, we invite you to come on board to Community Info Board and work with us, make community better.
Of course, and I think everyone on this call will make sure to uplift that opportunity to get involved with the Community Impact Board, Input Board. Councillor Mejia, what are the next steps for the Community Impact Board and building cultural hubs? I think she just hopped off. We'll go to Tien then. What are the next steps for the Community Impact Board and the community hubs in Hyde Park, like building a community hub?
Next steps, I think, continue on our path. I think we're in a good place. We've been having more events, for example, this past summer, we hosted 4 Fridays of music and small business vendors. We called it Bridge Fest. The goal was to bring people into the square and to venture out into the local businesses after or before the event. But it was also highlighting our diverse culture. So, for example, we had different themes. We had Caribbean, we had Latina, we had R&B. It was wonderful. And we had such great feedback from the residents and the people who participated. So our goal is to see if we can do it again next year and possibly extend it. Not sure, can't make any promises, but events like that is a great way to continue trying to be a cultural hub. Hyde Park Main Street partnered with 3 other Main Street, JP, Rosendale, and West Roxbury, to do a trolley bar hop. And that was done back in, I believe, late April. And it was the first time that we collaborated, and we brought people from other 3 neighborhoods into Hyde Park to try the 2 restaurants that were highlighted, was Bakari and Rincon, and taste the food. And some of these neighboring residents have never even been to Hyde Park. So even though they live 10 minutes away, they've never been here. And they're like, oh my God, we need to come back. This is awesome. And it was good for our Hyde Parkers to go to the other neighborhoods too. So events like this, where you're connecting communities and highlighting the culture of each neighborhood, is the way to go. And, as Main Street, we want to do more of these things.
Thank you, Tien. I think that kind of lends to what kind of was Councilor May was talking about earlier. Each neighborhood kind of has a little bit of a different personality, but it's like, how do we build that connectivity to make sure that we know that what's happening in JP, and maybe we could Hyde Park can build off the work that they're doing over there, or the building off the work that West Roxbury or Rosendale is doing. We can definitely all learn from each other. And I want to uplift a word that you mentioned, feedback. Feedback is important because it's not only allows people to feel invested into change in decision making, it builds the bench of opportunity for people to be involved, and feel like they have input over what's happening in their community. So feedback is always crucial. So Councilor Mejia, the last question for the segment, and then we're going to head to the questions in the chat. What are next steps? Like, what are next steps to make sure that
Yeah.
for the Community Impact Board in building a cultural hub in Hyde Park?
Yes. So I have had some issues with my internet, so I'm on the phone now, so I don't know how this looks, but can you hear me and see me?
We can hear you and see you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. I think when I think about this work, having started my own nonprofit organization, and really trying to bring in funders and anyone who would listen to us to help support our vision. I know how difficult it is for you to get buy-in from people, because oftentimes there are a lot of power brokers, right? And so one of the things that I have learned in my short time in government is that oftentimes the people who really have the best solutions have the least access to the not just the wealth, but just the people who can help make things happen. I'm being 100% honest right now, right? And during COVID, one of the things that we realized is that sometimes city government is just really slow to catch up to the moment. And so I think as you all are thinking about your next steps is really leveraging your network, looking at the people who are in your immediate network, whether they're business owners, nonprofit leaders, funders, right? And creating space for all of them to recognize the role that they play and executing against those deliverables. We established a learning pod during COVID that was funded privately, not publicly. And we worked in partnership with nonprofit organizations and parents to organize around that. That was driven by the people. And when we're talking about solutions and meeting the moment, it really is important for us to recognize the assets in our community, because oftentimes when they're talking about our people, they're always talking about the deficits and the things that we don't have. And I think as you continue to build this cultural hub, it's really about leading with those assets and recognizing that everyone in Hyde Park has a role to play and has the ability to really contribute to what this cultural hub could look like. So I think leaning in and creating space for everyone to be a part of that is going to be a key to your success. And then the other piece of it is that there are people who are going to show up, and they're going to show up because that's just what they do. And then there are people who are going to roll up their sleeves and do the work alongside you. I think that is going to also be something that is going to be really key, is having people who are going to not only invest in your efforts, but also work alongside you. And creating space for people who have never been invited is also key. So I would recommend that. I know that Hyde Park recently did a ideation session, and that was so incredibly amazing, where you had people come in to vision set, to identify and define for themselves what they were looking for. I think that same concept in building this cultural hub is going to be key, in making sure that it's culturally reflective, that we have multiple languages, and that we're meeting people literally where they're at to build collectively. And I think that that's what we need more of, not just in Hyde Park, but across the city, so that we can build the type of neighborhoods that really reflects the diversity of the city. So I'm here raising my hand, Marlon, just so you know, and everybody knows how I roll, because if you follow me, you know I'm all in on everything. I just don't talk about it. I actually do something about it. So count me in as a partner to work alongside you to bring this vision to life. Would be honored to be with you on this journey.
Marlon's putting you down. I see he's writing you down, Counselor. Thank you for your answer. Hopping into the questions in the chat, and then we'll wrap up for the morning. We have two. I'm going to loop in two of the kind of small business questions, and they're probably for Tian. How can small businesses actively contribute to the development of innovative cultural hubs in Hyde Park? And then how can small businesses help create a sustainable and resilient cultural ecosystem in our neighborhoods? Since they're both small business questions, I thought I'd give them to you.
Well, Canvas Studios is asking this question, but Canvas Studio is the ideal business for this question. Daphne has been involved from day one with the community, and that is what we need. We need people to participate, to want to share their business. She's actually was a member of our Bridge Fest committee. She came up with some amazing ideas to make it successful. So we try to reach out to businesses when we have events. We try to get participation, and like I've mentioned before, is very challenging for a small business owner to participate. But I think you need to have that dedication, that love for your neighborhood. If Daphne can do it, I'm sure other businesses can do it too. But she is like the model business to have in any neighborhood to make a cultural hub successful.
Daphne, you have to give everyone else the blueprint. Thank you for your leadership in Hyde Park. So the next question I'm going to give to both of the counselors, because I know you guys have been doing a lot on housing and like how do we keep families in the city. So how can we address the challenges of gentrification and displacement while fostering cultural growth in Hyde Park? I could give it over to Councilor Louis-Jean. How can we address the challenges of gentrification and displacement while fostering a cultural growth in Hyde Park? I think you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you, Daphne. That's a really important question because it is really expensive to live in the city of Boston. Actually, when you're talking to folks, especially talking black and brown folks who are buying homes, when we look at the neighborhoods, like, Hyde Park is one of the few neighborhoods where folks are really still able to maybe afford a place to live and a place to buy. But that is changing, right? I think the work that I've been doing on the council has really been about anti-displacement. So I started my career as an attorney representing families facing eviction and foreclosure. And if you're trying to prevent gentrification, the best thing that you can do is keep people in their homes. And so when you have a lot of money coming in, either from developers or private interests that want to buy a building where tenants live or residents live, how do we prevent it from going to the hands of someone who just has a profit mindset, right? The only thing they care about is profit. And so we've been working a lot with community land trust and nonprofit developers with the city's acquisition opportunity program to make nonprofit developers and CDCs more competitive on the private market to buy buildings so that tenants don't get displaced, or so that we can keep rents as low as possible. We also need to think about what our obligation is when it comes to affordable housing, right? It's a crisis that we are facing in an entire city. And as a neighborhood, as a Hyde Park, we have to think about what is our role in helping the city solve this crisis, right? In terms of making and ensuring that affordable housing is an option. And we think about, we have this desire and this goal for this wonderful neighborhood that is an attraction, right? Like, and Canvas Studios doing a great job. I was there last Saturday, and then we went to Zaz, and we were at Park 54. So we're becoming that. But to get more vibrancy, honestly, you need more people. And so how do we make sure that we are attracting people who want to go out and want to enjoy themselves? And that has to do with the sort of type of housing that we're building. Are we building units and buildings where folks can come and really enjoy where they live? And so I think all of that is really connected. I worked with MAHA, the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, helping first generation homeowners get money for down payments and closing costs. When we're talking about the racial wealth gap, a lot of that has to do with, again, a lot of it comes back to resources and money, and what, as a result of slavery, redlining, and blockbusting, the money and resources that our communities don't have. So we have to make up for that gap with supporting nonprofit organizations, looking at city-owned land, and how can we bring down the cost of construction by building land on city-owned property and working with developers that aren't just driven by profit. And I think all of that will help retain sort of our identity as a diverse neighborhood of immigrants, of Haitians, of Dominicans, of Puerto Ricans, of Latinos, of everyone, so that we're not building a cultural hub for people who can no longer call Hyde Park home.
Oh, thank you for that answer. Stabilizing our residents is something that will, again, make sure that we are sustaining our cultural institutions. I see two more questions, and then I'll answer these. I'll
You're
make
not
sure.
gonna let me answer it, Chief Malloy?
Oh yes,
I
yes.
have an
Sorry.
answer too. Thank you.
I just wanted to state
Okay.
that these are probably going to be the last questions. So everyone on the call knows. But the question was, how can we address the challenges of gentrification and displacement while fostering cultural growth in Hyde Park?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Chief, for allowing me to chime in here, because this is something that I'm also deeply passionate about. You know, I often talk about the fact that I grew up on Section 8, and my mom, I got my mom out of Section 8 and was the first person in my household, my whole family, to buy a house. And it took me taking out my entire 401k. My brother and I share one side with our kids, and my mom has the other, right? And so that is not um, the reality for a lot of can't afford to stay here, but we had to do this as a family. And so there's a number of different things that I've been doing on the council in particular to really address the housing crisis that we have. So I've been advocating. I created a line item in the city's budget for jobs for 19 to 24-year-olds, and I've been advocating for housing stipends for our students, particularly young people who are transitioning out of DYS and foster care, and students who are in non-traditional spaces and places. Because when we think about the housing crisis, we also have to think about some vulnerable populations that are not able to qualify for certain supports because of their background or because of their, they might not be a family, or they may not be entry, or whatever the case is. So I think that, some of the advocacy we've been doing in that space and pushing for housing stipend supports for this particular age demo is really important. We also have been working with the city to provide municipal employees with housing stipends, because we expect people in the city of Boston to live here, but they can't afford to stay here. And so we've created, through our funding process, through OPER in particular, is created a budget of $750,000 to support municipal employees who are making less than $55,000 a year, so that we can help support them in that space. Then the other piece, this is just for like workforce development, a hearing order for workforce housing, not just for city employees, but just workforce development housing, period, full stop. Because there is an opportunity for us when we're talking about building, that we're also being super intentional about building workforce development housing for our educators, for our first responders, for our healthcare providers, that we have to be really super intentional about how we're building in the city of Boston, so that no one gets left behind. And then the last piece, and this is what people feel really, and this is what I'm really encouraged by at the same time, is that one of the things that I heard early on when I first started, and it's only been 3.5 years ago, and I'm still hearing the same thing, is that people don't feel like we're really planning with people in mind, and which is why I'm really encouraged about all the efforts that the administration has been doing to really center people at the moment. Because what they're doing Allston and Brighton is different than what they're doing in East Boston, and it's different than what they're doing in terms of building. And I think that we need a unified standard, like a bill of rights for tenants, to really be able to feel like they are being protected. I know we have a lot of things at play, but when it comes down to it, we're going to need to be a little bit more aggressive. And I think creating space for people-led planning is going to be, I think, one of the strongest tools that we have in our toolkit to really be able to help stop displacement. That a lot of the families that are living here are now being displaced to Randolph, and I have no problem with all those other spaces and places, but what is happening to our people, y'all, is that they still have to then commute to the city of Boston to work. And so we're creating more financial hardship for people that we are displacing. So we have to just look beyond the people who we're struggling to keep to stay here, but we also have to start having some responsibility to the people that we are displacing, because then I think that, and only then do I really think that we're really going to start looking at gentrification in ways that really meet the moment. Because otherwise, I still think it's just a whole bunch of, fluff language that looks pretty and sounds pretty, but at the end of the day, it doesn't have the meat that this moment is requiring. I think if we hold people accountable, when we're displacing them, then I think that we'll start taking more stock and some serious notion to what we're going to do to stop displacement. I tend to be on the other side of things. I like to go as hard as I need to go to meet the moment, and that makes people feel uncomfortable. But I think that that's what these moments require, is for people to be unapologetic and unbashful about being bold to really help displacement here in the city of Boston. And the last thing I'll say, I created the task force, and one of the things we're talking about was looking at housing and policy, whatever, how we're going to lean into that.
Oh no, we are working on a digital equity plan. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Was I
You
frozen
went
the
out
whole
a little
entire
bit,
time?
Councilor Mejia. No, towards the end you were broken up. No, not the whole time.
You're still frozen.
Well, I don't know when the
I can text her and tell you she's frozen. So we can. Well, okay. You were frozen towards the end. Do you want to wrap up, or do you want to head to the next question, Counselor?
I don't know what the end was. I'm just saying that we just need to be as bold as these moments are calling for, so that we can go harder, really push. Otherwise, it's just a whole bunch of little cute that really gonna make anything change.
Thank you for your comments on that. I'll go to this question, and it seems like a Marlon question. Where did it go? Are there specific examples of successful cultural hubs development in other cities that could inspire similar initiatives in Hyde Park?
Well, they are, but the thing about Boston is actually we are like really unique because we've had a lot of cultural hubs that have been around for over 100 years. So that's something that you just can't find in cities that are only 100 years. So that's the first thing I say, because it takes time to develop a cultural hub. I like to use Chinatown as a very good example because in my learning about the community there, they've really staved off. They're right by the Boston Common. So trust me, during those times, it was not easy for them to maintain that space. And they've had to be very resilient. And the way they were resilient, obviously, is because they make money independent of the city. People come in and drop dollars directly in the pockets of their community members. And that now, I'm not a very big believer in trickle down. So that the money doesn't have to trickle down at all, because it's dropped right in the pockets of the community members, and they support their schools, they support their taxes, and it doesn't matter what the city says. So while it's still issues, from what I hear, there is, there are a lot less businesses, especially post pandemic. But the size of Chinatown has changed from back in the days, but nonetheless, that is what cultural hub. This kind of goes to the former question as well. Cultural hubs are a mechanism to stave off gentrification, because you don't have businesses that are just corporately orientated. If you have businesses, mom and pop shops, that are bringing in community members to spend money, these people are most likely to get involved in the community input board. These people are most likely to help out their school or participate in environmental cleaning efforts because they are, it's them, it's nobody else, when the Burger King was placed across the street from the Boston Prep Charter School. That's when I got involved because I was like, all of a sudden, I'm like, no, this is something that is in my community, is affecting my children, right? And because I have a business here in Boston, well, my nonprofit is based in Hyde Park. Now all the efforts and all the infrastructure and everything I have is going to fight things like that from happening in my community because I care. But if I was, maybe a more, nationally known brand that is very, known everywhere with, whatever, they probably, they would do something, but maybe not as specific or not with enough effort and not with enough boldness and powerness, Councilor Mahia said. But so that is why, so that's kind of what I think in regards to cultural hubs and why, they do help with gentrification and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for underscoring the fact that when we build cultural hubs, it pushes against the gentrification and displacing our residents that feel closely tied to the community or the culture. The last question we have here is, how can we ensure that the transformative power of culture remains inclusive and accessible to all residents in Hyde Park? That could be an anyone question if anybody wants to join in.
Well, I'll just say too, and like even in this discussion that we've had, like, we can do a better job. There are also like, and I speak this as a member of the Haitian community, we can do a better job. Like there's a new Haitian restaurant owner, Gigi's restaurant, right? How do we like bring her into the fold? I've had conversations with her. I helped her through the process. Like, how do we bring them into the center of these conversations? I believe it's also Las Vegas. So there are better things that we can do still to, maybe we hold events there. I conduct Scott Beatty, the Hyde Park Board of Trade is so good at being inclusive and making sure that all business owners in the area know about him. And with Tien, when we had the bridge closure, walking, you really do have to just sort of meet people where they are. And especially for people who like don't feel like government or institutions like show up for them, which is, especially Black and brown folks, working class people, we have to do the extra legwork, right, of bringing folks to the fold. And so I think that, we can continue to expand. The Riverside Theater has been there forever, and it's been not forever, but it's been an institution in Hyde Park for quite some time. And how do we continue building and creating more space that's accessible? And I think that there's effort happening, like even with Marlon, when you're talking about how do we look at the community input board to make to build to look towards the future. And how are we looking at, and I think because we're always asking that question, we're doing it right. Like we're not perfect, but we're doing it right because we are always asking, are we inclusive? We are always asking if we're accessible. And we are like, I have blind spots, right? Like everyone has a blind spot, and that we can show each other's blind spots with love and empathy and encouragement. That's how we're going to make sure that Hyde Park continues to be inclusive. And also like, we got to put our dollars where our mouth is, right? So if we care about creating a strong cultural hub and a strong Hyde Park, that's why it's important that you bring your birthday parties and your celebrations. You have them right here in your neighborhood, right? The big things that you would go downtown for. Not, we had a city council hearing this week about we are revitalizing downtown, and that's great, and we need to do that. And we need to support our neighborhoods and think about the work that we're doing in Hyde Park. Like Mattapan has a ways to go, right, to model what we've done and what we're continuing to do in Hyde Park. So we need to be proud about where we are, what we're doing, and think about like, okay, how do I bring in this new restaurant? How do I bring in this new business? How do I make them feel like they're part of this community? What event are we going to do next at Fair Nutrition, right? To like people like to support that restaurant, to support that business. And just kudos to all of our like young entrepreneurs, young Black women in Hyde Park who have really been doing it up with these businesses. And it's on us to really, really support them with our dollars, time, resources, and love.
Definitely. I think bringing our young entrepreneurs and people that are just doing great work in Hyde Park into the ecosystem and making sure they're part of our daily routine, whether that means, buying, groceries from a local place, or if you have, like your clothes, like if we just intentionally spend our dollars in a way that is building our neighborhoods, that will definitely go a long way. And a long way for, small business owners that put their heart and tears and sweat equity into building their businesses. They feel more part of the neighborhood and the community when we support them. So we are at time, and I want to wrap up, and I just really want to say a real big thank you to Marlon and his commitment to intentionality around building a Hyde Park in a community that is like so special and such a gem to the city, and also for your work at Afro-American TV and the platform, intentionality around it. So thank you, Marlon, so much. And also thank you to Nkiru, who is like literally in the back doing everything. If you see all the amazing additives in the streaming, amazing and flawless. So thank you for your work. It's definitely a new platform for me, but thank you for running us through and supporting us, and supporting being a facilitator. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you for the work you do every single day. Our at-large city councilors, Rusi Lujan, and at-large city councilor, Julie Mejia. The work you guys are doing is not unseen, and we really appreciate every single thing you do every day. And Tien, thank you for the dedication to Main Streets. We know our businesses are, where people can feel connected to their neighborhoods and their city and their community. So thank you for your work. Again, I think, Marlon, did you drop your contact information to make sure we're getting connected to recruitment for the community input board? Okay, perfect. And making sure everyone on this call is making sure that we're pushing that out as well. So thank you. Stay safe during this weather, and thank you everyone for joining and connecting and participating today. Have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.